Я представляю медіа-центр Україна «Укрінформ». Сьогодні ми поговоримо.
We welcome you at Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. Today we will be talking about the threats or security in the dangerous regions, the threats posed to the fixers. I want to introduce our speaker, Leonid, and I would like to ask you during this meeting to be involved to the maximum extent. It's very interactive. There will be practical tasks, so let's get engaged at the maximum extent possible. Well, we will start our lecture according to the timer, so please get engaged. It will be like a series of different events, and we will be happy to get a prompt feedback. So if you are interested about anything, so please let us know, and we will make more events for you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Leonid. I'm a head of AVC International Limited Liability Company. It's Ukrainian office. We do security consulting in different countries, including Ukraine. So while people are still gathering, I want to say a couple of words about the achievements, like what is AVC International doing around the world. For your understanding, Ukraine has one of the most intense conflicts in the world for the time being, and situation which is unfolding in Ukraine for the time being. It's a gray zone, a zone where we develop the standards which are already actively working in other parts of the world. So during this training, it's a small training, small seminar, so we will talk a little bit about preparation of the missions of media company, a journalist's mission in dangerous regions. Because for the time being, again, we specifically Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform, we developed the new model of operation of all the journalist community in view of the security issues. And it's critically important for us to get the feedback, to understand what are your requests, because the most of the recommendations we will be talking about, they were written upon the art conflicts of local nature, like a small-scale conflicts, and with the low and medium intensity. What we have in Ukraine now, it's an unprecedented conflict in terms of security and war science. It's unprecedented in terms of organization of activities of non-government organizations, media companies. So it's all new experience, and we're building the new approach to it. So during this training, we will have three basic rules. First, if at any moment you have a question, please raise your hand and ask me. I'll try to find the answer right away. If I don't have an answer right away, I promise that by the end of this event today, I'll find you an expert who will be able to answer your question. If you have if you have a question in your head, don't hesitate to raise your hand. We have trainings in different disciplines, more than 80 disciplines. We keep saying there are no dumb questions, because if you end up in an emergency situation, the kinetic situation as we call it, you may have this thought in your mind, I had this question but I never asked it. So our organization AVC International stands for Amat Victoria Komat. In Latin, the victory loves the prepared ones. So if you're prepared, you're trained, you know what to do. So all we will be talking about is your training. And yet another rule for everybody who joins us online, just hold on for 50 minutes. We will have 2.5 hours in total, and during the intermission, during the break, you may ask the question personally. Just come up to me and ask it. Don't hesitate once again. So what we're doing, what our organization is doing, is training all around the world, and we keep facing the situation that the assessment of risks and planning during the mission are the most important phases of activity of any professional in any dangerous region. I'm not talking only about journalists, fixers, or media people here. I'm talking about military organizations, non-government organizations. In the Ukrainian armed forces, there was a joke. It still is there. First, we engage in the combat, and then we'll sort things out. For the time being, in Ukraine, we're facing the same problem. People with some unverified experience, they come to a dangerous region, counting on their skills that they would be able to solve this or that problem promptly, but it results in bad cases. So today we will be considering the basic principles of security management. And the first thing we begin any mission with is our preparation. Even before we get the appointment, before we consider whether should we go on this or that business trip, are we ready to get engaged in that work? Again, I understand that many of you have tremendous experience, but we also have people with us who just started their activities in this area. Specifically, I'm talking about fixers. This profession emerged in Ukraine just recently. So it's important to know that not all the tasks should be accepted. It's an insight. The military does it the same way. We had this Soviet era doctrine. You got an order from your commander, just go ahead and do it. But before that, yes, you have to fulfill your task, fulfill your duty, but you have to assess the risks. So there are types of threats, types of hazards, and there are only examples given with the basic types. This system may be expanded. For example, when we plan our business trip, a trip of our instructors, our advisors, we use about 400 factors by each of these items, so about 400 items in total. So first, work and travel. It's not even translated, it's a stale phrase. Everything related to when you're planning your journey, something that you face all the time. You have to assess what is the probability that during your journey you may contract a disease, some specific disease, something specific to the region. You can contract some illness related to your professional activity. For example, we work during hot weather in the hall with air conditioning. Can we contract a professional disease here? Yes. Should we calculate such a risk? Yeah. We think that it might influence our activity in future because we know the devil is in details. If right here, right now, I'm getting cold, I won't be able to proceed to my battle mission, fulfill my security function just because I have a running nose, I have caught cold. Also related to work and travel are catastrophes, loss of belongings, loss of things, emergencies, but specifically about the loss of your belongings, it doesn't seem to be a hell of a catastrophe, but we keep facing this situation. One of the humanitarian organizations came up to us. They were transporting some of their equipment to Ukraine, and it's been 3 months that they cannot logistically, this logistic chain, it got way longer, and they cannot get their equipment. It's stuck in Poland, and their mission in Kiev is frozen. It's suspended. At the same time, the people should be billeted, they should be fed, they should be paid to, but the problem is somewhere even outside, somewhere beyond my capabilities. So we keep considering it a type of hazard. Natural hazard, like earthquakes, floods, avalanches, savage environment, so on and so forth. When people go outside, out in the, we were saying, yeah, this is the area of battle operations, and we were preparing to battle operations. This is what we were doing in Mali, Niger, and so on and so forth. But during such situations, even the basic things happen, such as earthquakes, floodings, and it may pose a serious hazard. My favorite item, I would like to highlight it in red. It's a wrong place, wrong time. It's probably about all of us here. We are in Ukraine, but if a person is unprepared, if we don't understand the context of what is going on inside the country, if they're at the wrong place, they don't see any markers of hazard, we're facing things like that. Meetings, protests, civil commotions, any civil activity, any types of violence, the violence is non-selective violence is a huge scope of questions, and we have to understand what do we understand as non-selective violence. Also skirmishes of non-military nature, criminality, that's yet another item, robbery, arsons, ambushes, and stuff like that. Any criminal activities are of threat to us because people, specifically foreigners, especially with some high cost equipment, wearing some brand clothing, they right away pose interest to criminal elements. Another scope, another item is another level of hazards, another level of problems, everything related to psychological stressors, intimidations, threatenings, torturing. This is something specific to your professional activity. The work of fixers, the work of journalists is related to your work with some materials, and we may become a victim of violence directed at us, some pressure directed at us specifically as a loudspeakers. Then another item is abduction of personnel. There are numerous cases in Ukraine. We cannot evaluate the number for the time being, but you know it's now measured in more than dozens. The civilians which are captured as prisoners, they are no prisoners of war, they have a different status, they are being kept hostages by unknown persons. That is yet another problem. Acts of violence, physical harm, assault, sexual violence, and so on and so forth. Those are the types of threats very widely spread in the areas of armed conflicts. Terrorism and military risks. The doctrine has changed recently because the war risks were not considered as part of this system. They were considered as a least probable situation. For the time being, we have a completely different situation. The terrorism threat and war threats due to the conflict in Ukraine, due to potential conflicts in other countries, they are now on par, on the same level, so they should be considered as equal. And non-selective weapons. When I started my military service back in 2004-2005, only back then we started talking about the non-selective weapons. But the latest conflict in Syria and Ukraine, they demonstrated that unfortunately we keep facing the use of a non-selective weapons, the mass destruction weapons, chemical weapons, and it may pose a very serious hazard. Why are we talking about this type of hazards? There is a scale according to which we evaluate the level of insecurity for us by all of those factors. So everything related to the upper line, this is something that happens during any of our missions wherever we go. It may be Ukraine, or it may be London or New York or elsewhere, and each of those items, it keeps moving on and on from the point of view of security. Why do we break it down by colors? You may take a picture of it, or we will hand the materials over to you. This color scale is used for the next step in our activity, the scale of risk assessment. So critical important. is every time when you go on a mission to assess the risks in the region where you go to, and by every of those risks you have to do some homework. It's a two-factor model, very simple. There are way more complicated models, maybe in your organizations, in your media outlets. You have the security departments who do it on a more profound level, but this basic scale is a fundamental to any such work. So any risk mentioned in this system, it should be added in view of the consequences and probability of it happening. So when we say, for example, that a minor robbery may happen almost always and it does not pose a significant problem to us, so we assess the probability of this event, the threat of this event, as insignificant. But we call it a degree, a temperature. When the consequences are critical and the probability is very high, we assess it as the high risk zone. So the list that we just considered, it's desirable to make at least before the deployment of all possible threats. We can share our list with you, or I can tell you the sources you can get those lists from, and using the open sources, using the official government sources, the sources of international institutions, you may assess the probability that there will be an event like that in a region where you plan your activity. So in fact, every time when we plan our mission, we do such assessment. It's a very important moment, what it will look like in future. If we have assessed the risk as high or very high, we need some extraordinary security measures to be in place. And the question arises whether that risk is even acceptable. So if we know that maybe up to 100% there will be a missile strike on that area, we ask ourselves whether it is acceptable to work in that region. Does it coincide with your personal attitude? Does it coincide with the security procedures of your organization? Is it even purposeful to work in that area? High risk, specific planning and special security measures are necessary. What does it mean? If you have special security measures in place contemplated for this situation, and for every small mission we make a small plan, only then we can efficiently operate in that environment. Moderate risk. So significant security measures. The table is translated almost word for word, so it works in English and in Ukrainian in the same manner. So low risk, the increased attention, special attention and additional security procedures are required. And very low risk are the regular security measures and procedures. So even if you assess the probability that in the region where you are about to work the risk is almost absent, everything is okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are not supposed to use the standard protocols, standard operating procedures for this activity. We try to plan everything ahead. So does anybody have any questions about the table? Nothing complicated. All right, then let's proceed. Why do we need it? We need to assess the level of risk which is acceptable, and it's critically important. It's not up to you if you are a fixer or assistant. It's not up to you even if you're a journalist or freelancer. It would be not your personal decision would be fundamental for the decision whether to get engaged in the activity. Not all of the news agencies, not all of the organizations are ready to the same level of risk to be accepted by their employees. Every organization develops their own protocols, but all the agencies they maintain the continuous process of risk assessment. It means that we don't only fill that paperwork before going on a mission. We continue to update them on a permanent basis. All those details, they get obsolete very quickly. So as soon as you have opportunity, specifically if you have a security office who deals with those issues, if not, then it's up to you. It's your work to update that knowledge database. So through assessment of those risks, we developed three main documents. So first, it's a level of a government institution, sometimes national level. For example, in Ukraine, there are national level of recommendations. It's a security strategy, and there is a number of security strategies in place. Do you know about security strategies? What security strategies do you know? No? Alright, should I tell you about this? Alright. So there are three key security strategies, and we say that there is a passive strategy, like acceptance. We accept everything that is going on, and we try not to actively interact, not to influence the processes. Another one is the strategy of security, when you take direct part in support of some other agencies. And another third strategy is, for example, when a military journalist, they are engaged in a military conflict and they use the active security strategies. The planning of security strategy is the level of top management of security agencies and security organizations, but it's important to understand that in our activity we are being guided by this guidance. And if we don't use them, those organizations we work with, they will not be able to ensure our security. At some point they may say that we violate the security planning, we violate the strategy which was approved on a national level, institutional level, or international level, and we don't get support and help from them, which may be of critical importance at some moment. Then risk management. Risk management is the management of risks in your professional activities. We develop a paperwork with a set of documents for specific activity, but to have an effective risk management in place, you have to continuously update your knowledge about the factors that influence the security situation. It means that we keep gathering and analyzing the information, even using at least the metrics that we've just seen on the screen, but we have to keep doing it continuously. And the last is the decision strategy, decision-making strategy. Those are the three documents, key documents that we rely upon in organization of our professional activity. To make a review of a security situation, to assess all the risks related to the mission, the story you are about to tell. So we keep making three main steps. You see, 3 is a magic number here. First, we assess the risks by the more expanded list that you may draw up. So we draw up a list every time. We can do it upon a brainstorming. We have to get some specialists engaged. We can use open sources. I'll give you a tip where this information may be taken to. So we list all the potential risks. Then we take these metrics, and for us we grade what is the level of probability of those risks, and then we decide for ourselves how to solve those potential emergency situations. For example, if there is a robbery, or robbery for the sake of ransom, we have to understand what are the consequences, who's gonna deal with them, who will do what, and what should we do to avoid this situation in the first place, or what to do if we end up in a situation like that. To do it in an efficient manner, we use 3 main documents. So the documents you have to work with are the security plan. There is a very important difference in English language. It's safety and security. So we're talking about safety and security planning here. Second, standard operating procedures. Standard operating procedures are the documents that describe your everyday activities to the most detail possible in the clearest way possible. Every type of activity, of your daily activity, we are not gonna talk about SOP in general, but it's a document for the whole team, not only for you. And we try to prepare this document in a way to make sure that every person who receives that document, they clearly understand what is described there and they can comply with it even without preliminary training. For example, when I come here for training, I have the standard operating protocol which says that, okay, I go in, I check for availability of water, fire extinguishers, bathroom nearby, what is the quality of the air, and when I'm going here, I send the same document to media center so they know for sure what I'm about to check. My colleagues who are in the other countries for the time being, they can check my standard protocol for this case, and it's important to make sure that all those documents are coherent so that in all the units, in all the branches of your organization, standard operating procedures, they may be different, but they should use the same fundamental scheme so that everybody understands everybody understands each other. I'm sorry. So the third document is an emergency plan. So in case this emergency comes up, you have to know what to do. All those three documents, they are maintained in a number of copies. First, you have it on you in some maybe safe place, but at hand. Another specimen, another copy should be kept by your security office or by your publishing house or elsewhere, and the third copy should be kept at your home. The third copy should be in possession of a trusted person so they can pick it up at any moment and check your activity. So everybody should be understanding. Everybody who's involved in this process should understand what's going on. Do you have any questions? No, nothing complicated, right? Everything is quite simple. If we bring it closer to the reality, if we work in some environment and you don't have choice, can you please repeat everything from the beginning? Good afternoon. I understand about the SOPs and plans. If we bring it closer to our everyday reality, if we say, for example, about work in some field conditions, for example, east of Ukraine, and if you go to Kiev and you pick an area where you will be able to work, you have a choice, you can change something, correct something. So at the same time, when you work in Drushkivka, you cannot comply fully with your plan, with your SOP. Do you just refuse the task, or, well, I mean, it's all very well, but in reality, how can it be used, how it can be applied to the real situation? Thank you for this good question. So this is what I was talking about. First of all, we cannot allow ourselves get engaged in some professional activity without some level of training, some level of preparation. We cannot say that I start drawing up my new plan just in the middle of the mission, somewhere in the field. So I prepared way before I go to a dangerous region, because in a dangerous area I will not have time for this planning. All those briefings, all those instructions and documents, they are being prepared way ahead. Second, when we prepare those specific documents, SOPs and emergency plans, we define when the emergency plan comes into effect. When we understand that the security situation is assessed as potentially high level of threat by the team, we inform our curators of the mission or our headquarters or our management, and without hesitation, this is that trigger moment when we start wrapping up the mission. Another question. It's very difficult to continue gathering information to ensure the security of a journalist mission, but we have to do it to ensure our safety and security. And I have a ready answer for you why those documents should be developed and why they should be used. Usually we illustrate it in quite a simple manner.
Ми говоримо про те, що якщо
We're saying that if a critical event has happened and you don't have time to say that we were ill prepared, something had to be prepared in a different way, we had to approach something in a different way, so everybody who failed, they cannot tell you that they failed. The price of a mistake is your life, your health, or the life, health and security of your team. So, okay, let it be Drushkivka or any other hazardous area like Mogadishu or elsewhere. When you go there, you have to have everything prepared to make sure you can do your professional activities there, because you cannot make a decision right on spot. For example, talking about the American Armed Forces, a few words about the military plan, and it's not directly connected to our activity, but the principles are fundamentally the same. For example, the forecast model by the Russian army, they gather the statistics, and based on the mathematical model they try to develop a forecast for the situation which is about to happen. This is what the US armed forces were using and NATO armies were using before. But the armed conflicts, even with low intensity such as Afghanistan or Iraq, they demonstrated that those forecasts, they are quite unrealistic, because during every single moment of time there are new details coming up which may change the forecast. Another model is a dynamic analysis of information. When we, in our analysis, we rely on the amount of data that we have at very specific moment. We push the button, we get the result. In a second we push the button again, and the result that comes up may be different to the previous one. And even the American Armed Forces, with all their technical capabilities, they cannot always use that model. Us as persons, as individuals, as an organization, we don't have such technical capabilities to promptly bring up such analytics. This is why we rely on the protocols and mechanisms that we develop ahead. If you end up in a hazardous region, we will touch upon it in the next module. So when we are in a dangerous environment, we have two options. Either we act according to the plan that was developed previously, we have some probability of knowledge that we know what to do, or otherwise we can improvise, and this improvisation usually does not end well. Us as a security organization, we use organizations of big organizations like United Nations or UNICEF. They recommend to have all the plans prepared ahead according to this model that we are reviewing now. How to do it in a proper manner, we can do it. We can review it during the more expanded training, because it usually takes 5 to 8 days, not 2.5 hours, and even during that training you cannot get the whole mass of knowledge that you're supposed to, because in the majority of countries, in Ukraine as well, the security management is higher education. You have to do this professional. If it's not your basic occupation, you can use the documents that were developed for you before. They are in open sources. You may use it. And once again, thank you for the question. Do you have any more questions on the floor? If we don't have any more questions, let's make a break. It's 15:35. We make a 5 minutes break, and in 5 minutes we continue right here.
Ну що, колеги, може?
So, dear colleagues, can we continue? All right. Let's do it this way. Once again, for everybody. If you feel you want to ask a question and you don't want it to be public, please come up to me during the break, but I would like maybe to discuss some questions publicly. For example, what were the cases when those plans they worked and they helped the people, and I can tell you about the cases where the plans didn't work and they didn't work to such an extent that we use it as training case. There is a story, a public story, I mean known to the public, maybe Richard Rescorla, maybe this name rings a bell. It's a story of the World Trade Center. One of the security officers, he was a Vietnam veteran, Rick Rescorla, now very famous. Unfortunately, he died specifically during those events in the World Trade Center. But what happened there? Rick Rescorla, when he took the office of the security departments of one of the towers of World Trade Center, as a retired military, he's seen that those twin towers, they are potentially one of the most vulnerable targets for terroristic attacks, and he kept reiterating it. He was submitting reports that there is a high level of probability of some unpleasant situation happening. He was not heard. He was told to be a crazy veteran. No one wanted to talk to him. He was a veteran in Yadran. That was one of the biggest battles in Vietnam. So he survived that battle, which is a hell of an achievement by itself. So many times he was trying to explain to the management of the Twin Towers that there is such a threat. 5 years before the terroristic attack, he brought a truck with the fake explosives to the basement of one of the buildings to show that the threat is real. And when the situation happened in the World Trade Center, he personally was trying to organize the evacuation of people. There is a number of pictures online. I didn't prepare them for the presentation, but there are pictures of him with a loudspeaker. So he was mocked. Everybody was telling him he's an ill person. He was appointed the security officers in the offices. He was told to be wrong. But those people whom he trained to use the emergency stairway, those people who were trained by him, they survived. So those were the security plans. He was trying to save the people who refused to undergo such training, so he followed them, and unfortunately during one of those moments one of the towers fell and he died under the debris. But it was verified that he saved more than 2,000 people during that emergency situation in the World Trade Center. So that person is an example that you cannot be over concerned with security, specifically in a hazardous area, specifically when we find ourselves at the place where we are. It's a popular phrase that everybody in Ukraine is a soldier, the whole of Ukraine is an army, so potentially everybody in Ukraine is in the zone of high risk, specifically if you're involved in journalist activity, because potential threat that you will be used as an object of information influence is pretty high. Capturing of journalists, use of journalists as the media premises for some further activities is a well-known terrorist tactics, and we know that now we're facing terrorism on the government, on the state level. The terrorist state will use all the opportunities they can. So we have to keep training on and on and on. What else we have to understand? That the psyche of any person works in a specific way in an emergency situation. So let's talk about another American actor. You may have heard of him, Jeff Cooper. Does anybody know who he was? Did anybody attend range practice course? So when we're on a range, there are 3 rules of behavior with the weapon. Never direct your arms in the direction of other person. So this is the very specific person who developed this shooter, the Ranger code. So he was a person who developed a code for behavior in the emergency situation. It's a very important thing, because the majority of people will live in the same environment. We act the same way. It has a lot of letters here, so let's sort it out. So Jeff Cooper identified there are 5 levels. It's called the Cooper Color Code. If you want to search it, if you want to Google it in English. So those are the level of insecurity here. White color. This is the condition of euphoria when you are, for example, fall asleep, when you are in love. It's not a typical condition for a person, but in that condition people get reinvigorated, and it's the most healthy condition for a person. Yellow color is the condition of concentration, of focusing. If there is a threat, but it's in concrete, for example, like now we are in a comfortable hall, in a comfortable environment, we communicate in a comfortable way, but we understand that potentially there is a threat and somewhere it's there. And the majority of the people in the world, they live between these yellow and white conditions. People may spend 14 to 15 hours in this condition, and otherwise they have to switch to the rest condition, because we start having problems with processing information. But if we spend more than 15 hours in this condition, we will talk later about what happens. Orange is when we know that there is a threat, when we understand clearly that we should make a decision, we should act somehow, and our body focuses, the hormones are being thrown in the blood, and it's critically important for us to know that you cannot stay focused permanently. A grown-up person may stay in this condition of maximum concentration up to 30 minutes. Then we switch to intensification or calming down. We switch to tranquility, but we cannot spend a lot of time in this condition. It's very important, because a lot of people don't understand their capabilities properly. For example, when I end up in the middle of the battle, I cannot maintain control and analysis condition for a long time, because I start burning out. There is a term, it's accepted throughout the world, it's called fatigue. Fatigue is when you're exhausted physically and emotionally. The next level is red. It's the condition of active actions. It's the most stressful for a person, and you can spend up to 30 minutes in this condition. When we say that it's an adrenaline rush, in fact it's not adrenaline, but yes, when the hormones are injected into a blood flow, we can do some activities, but at the same time our intellectual capabilities start decreasing. I become way stronger but not quite smart. And the next level is the black level. It's shock, torpor, is when the external irritators are not perceived by a person. It's the deepest state. It's not psychology but psychiatry. But people end up in a condition where they don't process any information. It's one step away from the death. Actually, what's important to understand is that every level depends on the external stress factors and external factors that exist in the environment and the factors of survival for all of us. For example, if I am motivated, if I'm trained, I'm prepared, if I approximately understand what's going on, if I have a plan of actions for my activity, it will be way easier for me to stay in the comfort zone, in the control zone, because when you lose control of your security is the critical moment when I switch to the dangerous phases. And it's important to understand that when we are in the area of active warfare, this orange and red state, we cannot spend a lot of time in those conditions because your body will automatically switch to tranquility, and it's very dangerous. So for such situations when the brain doesn't work properly, we have to have the procedure in place, a very strict algorithm. For example, if you were undergoing the medical training, basic medical training, any person when they feel pain, they have to use some mnemo techniques like march that is used by the military in the tactical medicine. If those are security situations, there are other mnemo techniques that you may use, so we rely on the security protocols here. So what to do if my job is like that? I work as a fixer, I work as a military firefighter, journalist, I do some extreme things. So there is a rule of 4P. I don't want to frame our interpreter right now, so there is international and there is Ukrainian version. Ukrainian version is like bad training leads you to full failure. In English we say the right proper preparation results in victory, something like that. So everything we do on the level of preparation and training. The more documents, rules, regulations we prepare, the more we train ourselves, the more efficient is our activity. The more operations you practice, the higher is the possibilities that you get back to your family alive. So what you should train in, what you should prepare. Just to remind you, the safety and security plan, and this document should be updated continuously. We gather our information, we get our data for the briefing, and we update the safety and security plan. For example, should anything go wrong right here, right now, we will go through the door to Bogdan Khmelnytsky Street, but we know for sure that in Bogdan Khmelnytsky Street it's very hot outside, there is intense traffic, so otherwise we will go outside to the Chikalenko Street or to the backyard of this building. So we develop all the plans for every specific situation, and this more frequent you update your plan, the safer is your activity. Within 20 years of my experience, I have never seen an organization who says we update our safety and security plan too frequently. If I have people for that, I could have them tasked with updating the plan all the time. Standard operating procedures should be always complied with. There is no place for improvisation when we talk about security. If you're engaged in any dangerous activity, so if you have SOPs developed, they should be complied with, but by all the members of your team. It's mandatory to the full extent, 100% of cases. You don't have a specific SOP for that specific case, so sit and write it. Those documents are never redundant. They are being used all the time. They're being updated all the time. The bad news is that you have to prepare them for your teams. No one is gonna make it for you. You in your team will be writing those SOPs for you, for your colleagues. Your security office will draw it up for your organization, and we will continue developing those documents on and on. There is no book with the standard operating procedures for everybody. And the emergency planning. Emergency plan should be ready, and you should practice to do it. Bad case scenario. Again, bad case, we were training a security organization who provides security for government officials. I'm not gonna tell you the name of this company, but they accompany the VIPs, the government officials. They are professional rangers, certified guards, certified security guards with high skills. They are the winners of the competitions. There is a special competition for bodyguards, and at some moment we ask them to do some exercises, but with the person that they guard, with that specific person. So I cannot give you the name of that person, but it's a very big athlete. And it turned out that all the bodyguards all together, they cannot lift him and they cannot carry him to his car, to his vehicle, because what they were doing, they were training it with one another during their trainings, but they never did it with the person that they are supposed to guard. That is a huge problem. It turned out that all their trainings, all their procedures, they have nothing to do with the reality. So we have to make sure that our plan can be fulfilled. Training should be ongoing. Training should be going on incessantly. Like Rick Raskorla said, when we will need it, we will not have time to train. So we try to organize such trainings in our organizations for those whom we train. So such a training for the majority is called HEAT. Hostile Environment Awareness Training. It's a standard training that is underwent by almost all the specialists before the deployment to the dangerous regions. People train how to develop those documents, how to fulfill those requirements, and what are the additional skills to learn to work in a dangerous region efficiently. So those are the three documents. Unfortunately, we are limited on time. We cannot take them apart in detail, but please review them, develop the fundamental documents. We will leave our contacts for you, and we will do it free of charge. We will review your documents, and we will see whether you can improve something. It will be our pleasure to tip you. Another document that I want to discuss with you separately. I promise not to give you the documents, some specific documents, but this is the basic necessity in our opinion, so we want you to know what it is. So there are documents that the military call ISO-PREP, isolated personal report, or the civilians call it the proof of life. It's when a person ends up in a dangerous region and there is a probability, potential probability that such a person will be captured as prisoner. We understand that with a high level of probability, those people or those who captured them will try to get in touch, and we have to have a form, a standard document to make sure that the person that we are getting in touch with or we are being contacted on behalf of is the specific person that we want to talk about. And in case of lethal event, we have to have a document by which we can recognize that person, so that we avoid such complicated procedures when the families go to a dangerous regions to recognize the course, to verify the personality. So what is isoprep? Roritex Trust, they put it on their website, the ready-made samples, the stencils. It has a lot of forms, including the security planning forms. So what information should be contained in that document? You add all of your professional details, personal details, there are specific features for recognition, like clothing size, special marks on the body, height, weight, everything. But what's most important, somewhere there in the end, we describe the questions and answers, for example, which only you can know an answer to. It's not like a verification through the bank when you're being called to and said to give us the year of birth of your grandmother. So it's when you formulate the question and you are the only one who knows the answer. So the document is drawn up in 2 copies. The first copy is on you, but you will leave it with your security office, and another copy is with your trusted person at your home. This is critically important because when I'm, as a security officer, getting in touch with you, I pull this document and I tell you, question number 3, what is the answer? No more questions. Or I ask you some more questions that you planned for yourself that it's only you who knows the answer to. It will allow me to promptly and efficiently verify you as a person that I'm supposed to communicate with. So this document is used by the security services, commercial security services, government security services, for interaction, for communication with the people who end up as hostages or prisoners of war. That's why we try to implement it at least in the basic level in Ukraine, because it's not in place in Ukraine so far. Another form, you can find it as well. This is the American military document. This is the real military form. It's an open source information. It's the military form of ISOPREP, isolated report, personal report, that we fill, where we fill all the information about that person and we ask the same questions. So it's said classified when filled. So it's a classified paperwork, but it is used to make sure that the security officers who try to communicate, who try to find you, if you call them, so that they could ask you questions to compare that information, to match it with the information provided in this paperwork. Even if we work in the Ukraine, if you are Ukrainians, if you're Ukrainian natives, it's desirable to have a document like this in any form. Retain it with your trusted person and security officer, because again, for the time being, we have a number of cases when recognition takes a lot of time, and during that period we cannot efficiently fulfill our duties to save you or to rescue you. So what we have there is a small instruction of how to use it: personal information, age, gender, height, the clothing size, medical details, or something of critical importance too. For us, it's critically important to understand the medical indicators, whether it's the person we need or not. Personal information, by the way, it's interested in the US Armed Forces. There is a separate block for trainings. For trainings, it's important to understand whether the person was trained to act in conditions like that, because the heat training is important, the military survival training. Syria is a gold standard for those who work in the hot regions, in dangerous regions. It's important for us to understand whether the person is trained or not. So there is a block for the field for information of military nature, and then there is questions and answers part to identify a person, something that only you can, some questions that only you can answer to. We recommend to have these documents downloaded. You can download it by those links. Otherwise, we can provide them to you. We do it free of charge. Please use them, because when an emergency situation arises, you cannot do it before. What else is necessary to know? We are being frequently asked, what are the other things we should know to act effectively in the dangerous region? It's a small list which we would like ideally every person who is engaged in journalist activity to know and know how to use it. So risk assessment that we were discussing today, in reality this training on risk assessment takes 1 or 2 days. It's a huge block of information, a lot of work actually. But again, you understand what are the matrices that we use, so you can expand your knowledge. Standard operating procedures, planning, and emergency plans. That's a separate module. We want everybody to know how to use it. Survival when captured as prisoners. So there is the number of phases when people are being captured as prisoners, and it's important to understand what actions will be relevant to what phase of capture, because when you are being captured by criminals or non-organized military of the lower level, the soldiers, you can still do something. They are afraid of you. But when you are being captured by a professionally organized group, for example, organized criminals or organized military team, it requires a different level of training, a different type of training. Those people, they will not do a lot of harm to you usually, but they clearly understand why they need you. So you have to differ those two things. So basic medical aid, civil and military. Not everybody who works in the area of active warfare should undergo the tactical medicine training. Not everybody who works in civil conditions, not everybody needs only civilian training courses. All the knowledge has to be updated all the times, because when we're in the middle of an emergency situation of medical nature, we clearly understand that by Cooper color code we're not in the condition of tranquility. We have to fulfill some actions in a prompt manner, and you can only do it when you maintain your skills, when you keep doing it on and on and on. Psychological health. You don't have to attend a course of family therapies. You don't have to learn Gestalt psychology only if you're curious about it, but you have to study the techniques for identification of acute psychiatric reactions, not PTSD, because that's medicine. Here we're talking about this acute reactions to stress. You have to know how to diagnose them and how to act in those situations. There are specific techniques we can tip you off. The techniques of quick diagnostics are critical. Situational awareness. Situational awareness is a huge scope of skills that are necessary, but we're saying that collection of information should be ongoing, and this situational awareness is related to the way you build your structure of gathering information, how you use different sources. It's popular to talk about open source intelligence nowadays. But there are other sources that we use. We have to understand how to maintain that hygiene. There is such an approach, the triangle of security. Maybe we'll talk about it during our following trainings, what's important for us to maintain the safety and security, and the identification of anomalies. We have to understand what situation is more or less safe and secure for us, or which situation can pose potential threat, and how to act in conditions like that. Another block is safety of vehicles. It starts with the technical inspection of vehicles, and it goes all the way to passing the block posts, avoidance of ambushes, and everybody who's involved in this activity in the dangerous region, they should be trained to do this. CBRN threat. CBRN security. We were joking in our country previously when we were undergoing such courses, but now we face the situation when everybody present here, along with all the civilians, should know at least the fundamentals of CBRN protection. It's a separate module, so it's desirable to have some training in that. EIDs and explosive devices, mines, that's a separate block of training. It's called EORI. It's a broad course of training. It's information on mine threat for civilians. It's desirable to have everybody able to identify the explosive devices. Well, you're not supposed to do anything about them, but you have to know what they look like. And the same story with the weapons. The weapons that are used in Ukraine, in arms that are possessed by the enemy, all parties to the conflict, you have to be able to identify such thing as a weapon, understand its characteristics, and to understand how to act with them. If you check the UNICEF instructions, they write in big letters that journalist is not a combatant, and if you have arms in your hands, you lose this protection, you automatically become a combatant, a party to the armed conflict. So it's important to identify the weapons, to know what it looks like, if, for example, it ends up in your vehicle or place of your bulletin. Survival in a combat. So it's a very extensive topic that we spent a couple of days of training on. It's not about eating snakes or building an igloo. We talk about the behavior in emergency situations, during battle operations, what to do, how to organize a corridor of security for yourself. It's a route, the avenue of your approach to the dangerous territory, and the avenue you live by. It's an interesting block. If anybody is interested in it, we will make another lecture that will take another 3 or 4 hours at least. Surveillance and counter-surveillance, critically important thing, because journalist activity, it includes collection of information, including visual information, and very frequently you end up as an object of surveillance. The information is gathered about you, it may be dangerous, and you have to be able to clearly identify that this thing is happening, and you have to understand your protocol, where to go, whom to inform, should this be happening to you. Again, for you, a real case from Ukraine. Before the beginning of the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, a delegation of foreigners is coming to Ukraine. They're being put in a minivan by a security organization, and then it turned out that it was not a security organization. The people were brought to the forest, their belongings were taken from them, and then let go. It seemed to be okay. They found the website of a security company in Ukraine, they paid the money for that, and they ended up like that eventually. So it's a critical case. So there was an outleak of information that this is possible, that those people could be, so to say, circumvented in a way like that. So crisis communication, when you end up in the area of active warfare, the majority of the people you communicate with, they are armed. On top of that, the most people you communicate with, they can be aggressive. Sometimes it coincides, it may be the same person. They may be armed and aggressive at the same time, so you have to know how to avoid conflict situations. What to do in cases like that, it's critically important too. Separately, the skills like radio communication, navigation and oriented, use of equipment and personal protective equipment, digital security, that's a huge block of training, and gender security, because again, unfortunately, we keep facing this again and again. So this is the scope of knowledge you receive during the basic training course, during this hostile environment awareness training. So within a week, you can just superficially find out about what you're supposed to know. And going ahead of your questions, obviously not all of those things can be learned. In the majority of the big organizations, there are specific security officers who deal with organization, planning, training of people in all of those areas. So they take part of that responsibility for them. But finally, all that training is on you, because you are the direct participant of all those events. And it will depend on you, the probability of your survival. What is good, again, getting back to Cooper Color Code, if you have good knowledge of the situation that you are about to end up in, your organism, your body will take the stress easily. So the higher is the probability of your survival in this or that emergency situation. Do you have any questions regarding what we've just reviewed? Let me ask then. Getting back to those forms. This proof of life form. There is a field for questions and answers. Is it proper to add such questions to a proof of life, which would be an indicator that a person ends up in an emergency situation? Shouldn't we code something in those questions, some situations, something like that? No, it's a myth from the movies. I'm being asked these questions very frequently during our trainings, but it's all from the movies. If you are being captured by people who are professionally trained, you're not gonna make it as Rambo or Dolph Lundgren or someone else. You cannot tell them you're made of steel. They're gonna break you, believe me. You won't be able to lie, you cannot be able to replace the words, you won't be able to act unrealistic, you won't be able to imitate doing something. So usually we try to do it in such a way that in any stress condition, in any condition of their psyche, people could answer those questions without inventing any codes. Because professional military who capture the people as prisoners, or professional, say, criminals, they know for sure they will be able to find where you juxtapose the facts, especially if you will be intimidated, if you're exhausted. So add this fill this field the most realistic possible, so that in any condition, under any stress, you understand what you are required to say. For what, if you remember, according to Geneva Convention, the military have 4 packages of information they are able to convey. Why the military are only given 4 packages? Because under any stress, they should be able to convey that information. So you should be able to do it not when you say in a comfortable environment, when you had rest, but when you're exhausted, intimidated, sick, maybe with some injuries, and still you should be able to answer all those questions, comply with all the protocols, so you're not gonna be in your normal condition. Because when everything goes wrong, you should be ready to any emergency situation. When the situation becomes kinetic, only the simple solutions work. Any more questions? Can you give us a specific example of the situation when, for example, there was a group of fixers or journalists and they were going to, say, to south or east, and they were making use of this knowledge that they acquired from you when they ended up in a kinetic situation. And thanks to the fact that they underwent your course previously, they ended up with either minimal loss or without any losses. Well, obviously we have some information that we cannot convey or disclose, but it's a little bit difficult to answer this question when everything worked. I can tell you when things did not work, when people came back to me and they say that they are all right, it means that everything worked in their case. But we know, for example, there is a fresh case. We work with one humanitarian organization now, and they were presented a minivan. And they decided to bring that minivan to the area of active combats. They wanted to hand it over to the military. So we were preparing the route with them. We were preparing all the things with them, and as they were approaching, they ended up under shelling because the minivan was colored in the camouflage colors. And when we passed that information on to the military, they were expecting to see an ambulance minivan, the information that we provided to them, not a military van. And it resulted in a huge problem because we almost lost that group of volunteers. Another known case when two British volunteers, I think about 4 months ago, when they ended up under shelling due to the lack of planning, because people who were supposed to meet them over there, they just never arrived. They just went somewhere randomly. They were expecting to go somewhere to a safe place, so they ended up under shelling. One was killed and another is missing in action for the time being. So there are more bad cases than we would like to, but good cases for us, our criteria is when people come back and everything is alright with them, is the best thing that can happen. Like this, those protocols, they work. The Ukrainian military uses them, we use them, we work a lot with the military, with different military departments, so I could say it's a gold standard. Our goal, again, I want to say Ukrinform and Media Center, why we're trying to have these trainings en masse today, because all around the world those standards are used everywhere. This culture is being born only in Ukraine, and we want Ukraine to use all those standards in media and journalist activities. This is what is supposed to be happening. This is a must-have. And if you are a local specialist, a fixer who works with the foreigners, you can count on having any foreign journalist to have underwent either HIT or ISRE training. They know for sure what is proof of life card. They know for sure how the emergency planning is being done. And for that person, it would be unclear why you don't have those documents. It may influence your professional activity as well. When I'm being approached by the foreigners, my colleagues, I'm saying, okay, here's the list of documents, so we speak the same language with a specialist from all around the world, whether it's Africa or China or Ukraine. We use the same standard, and it's desirable for us to use the same standard, all of us. It influences the level of security. Do you have any more questions? If we have no more questions, I appreciate your participation. It's 16:26. We're wrapping up. Are we? So let's wrap it up for today. Are we going to have the links? Yeah, we will send you the links separately. I appreciate your time. I hope we will continue. But please, you can write a request to the media center or to our organization directly what is the information you would like to hear during our following events, what are the materials that you would like to review in a deeper detail, and it would be our pleasure to do it during our next sessions. We will make it more interactive, maybe more productive for everybody. And again, there will be a series of trainings going on. Yes, we hope that you will have interest. It's up to you to plan it, not up to us. If you want to get a series of training, if you want to get some knowledge, practical and theoretical, it would be our pleasure to have trainings like that. All of these trainings are happening offline. We have training bases in Ukraine and in Europe, so we can organize training like that as well. Not right here. The theory may be here, but practice is not going. Practical trainings are not going on here. There is no single approach to heat trainings because it's developed for local conditions, local requirements. What we're doing now in Ukraine is training specifically developed for Ukraine, recognized in Ukraine and abroad. That's the standard of training, and people who undergo this training, they should be ready. Well, you know, it's not on every training that you are being trained that you don't have to eat the liver of the polar bear. Well, there are no polar bears in Ukraine. This knowledge should be actual for Ukraine for the time being. I have a question.
Of the clients you work with, I'm guessing it kind of segments between small, medium, and large. And in my mind, small might be kind of the freelance journalist coming out with few resources. Medium, something bigger than that, and large, CNN and a convoy of armored vehicles. I'm wondering what, maybe at each level, what mistakes do you most commonly see? And specifically, well, I guess at each of those three, or maybe you break it down differently. But I'm mostly interested in small and medium. That conversation.
Дякую за запитання. Буду відповідати українською для всіх.
Thank you for this question. I will answer in Ukrainian. So the most common mistakes by the foreign organizations that we're facing in Ukraine is the non-actual knowledge about Ukraine. First of all, it's a huge problem. The trainings that those people were undergoing, they were based on the information from Afghanistan, Iraq, but not based on Ukrainian realities. The training and preparation was based on the principles that were used for Stars and Stripes, for example, in Korea, but definitely not for modern conditions, modern environment of Ukraine. So you have to understand, Ukrainian war for the time being is a new precedent, new case that requires very thorough training. With the majority of organizations, specifically of the middle level, they don't have big companies in their organization. So with the majority of those organizations, we have an underestimation of risks that exist in Ukraine for the time being. Everybody thinks that you may sit here in Kiev, it will be safe, and for the weekend, for 5, 6, or 8 hours, you can reach Donbass with an intercity train, make some footage over there. But unfortunately, we have a huge number of cases. I'm not in a liberty to talk about it due to our NDA, but there was a huge number of journalists who perished during the defense of Kiev, non-professional journalists who wanted to make some footage in the suburbs of Kiev to see what happens within 15 minutes. Unfortunately, there is a great number of unpleasant cases, so please don't underestimate what's going on in Ukraine. Ukraine requires the serious training, preparation of all the security, military operations. Those are the very serious protocols developed by very serious security organizations. not only us, there is a lot of other organizations working in Ukraine, so don't be ashamed, don't hesitate to ask. There is a number of companies who do it for free. They help arrange the security of the media organizations, so don't be afraid, don't hesitate to prepare ahead, to train ahead, because again, when emergency situation arises, you don't have time to train. If there are no more questions, thank you for your attention. I hope to see you again, and I really hope, personally, I hope that you will have this knowledge, but you will never have to use it in your professional activities. Thank you, see you.